the Bengals were entering 2022 having exceeded expectations a season prior because of a successful season from quarterback Joe Burrow coming off that torn ACL from his rookie year in 2020. And they also had a breakout year from rookie receiver Jamar Chase. And they also had some key stops on defense in their playoff run, especially when it came to the AFC title game where they upset the Kansas City Chiefs, where they came back down 21-3, forced overtime, and got a key interception off of Patrick Mahomes to get to the Super Bowl. But unfortunately for them, they fell just a little bit short of winning Super Bowl 56 against the LA Rams. So, yeah, a pretty successful season for the Cincinnati Bengals, who many thought were going to be in a big rebuilding mode in year 2 of that. So for Cincinnati, obviously, they wanted to get back to that point. They wanted to get back to the big game. But to do that, they had to address the biggest problem that cost them that big game. And that was the broken offensive line. The offensive line that not only got Joe Burrow injured in his rookie year, but also got him beat up, got him sacked a lot in 2021, including that Super Bowl. So last offseason, they decided to go get tackle Lyle Collins, center Ted Karras, guard Alex Kappa in free agency. They really beefed up that offensive line to better protect their franchise quarterback. So by doing that, Cincinnati seemed poised to make another run with that better offensive line to better help out their quarterback, give him time to throw. So Cincinnati seemed poised to make a better run to claim their fame in the AFC. Unfortunately for them, when the regular season came around, things didn't exactly start off that way. They began the season 0-2, and their offense looked very sluggish in contrast to the year before, especially Joe Burrow. He threw 4 interceptions in the very first game against Pittsburgh, and he was very off target in the game against Dallas. And the new look offensive line experienced a lot of growing pains to start off the season. It took some time for them to gel together and protect their quarterback. And people were saying, it's the same old Cincinnati offensive line, even though they got some new fancy pieces there. So, sure, the Bengals slowly returned back to their winning form, but they would suffer some pretty bad losses within the division, especially on Halloween night. I still remember when the Bengals were falling down 25-0 to the skid marks. Yes, the Cleveland skid marks, aka the Browns of all teams, where everyone on Cincinnati was really bad in that game. They got some Halloween deja vu in that game, and they got boat raced by Jacoby Brissett and the skid marks. But fortunately for them, that game proved to be the catalyst for what ended up being an 8-game winning streak for Cincinnati to end the season for them. So Joe Burrow looked like he is playing like an MVP candidate again since then. The new look offensive line started to finally gel together and protect their quarterback. And the defense was making the clutch stops it needed to do to support its offense in game-winning situations. So by the time you get to Week 17 in a pivotal matchup against the Bills at home, the Bengals not only had a chance to wrap up the AFC North, but also stake a claim on an outside shot to grab the top seed in the conference. But unfortunately, as you all know by now, the Damar Hamlin situation happened, and where he collapsed. And like I said with the Bills, both teams handled this situation very well. It was clear and obvious that there's no way these players can play. And Sean McDermott and Zach Taylor got together. It's like, yeah, we can't. After all this emotion, after a player nearly just died, you can't have this. You can't let these players continue on like this. So they got together, brought their teams back to the locker room. It's like, no, we're not playing this game. So really good, especially really good for Cincinnati too. It's like on their home field, like you can't let these players play. Even if the NFL really wanted them back out there, it's like, no, we're not doing it. So for as good as Cincinnati did in that Week 17 game, they got the short end of the stick there when it came to the modified playoff format when the game eventually got canceled. So what do I mean by that? Well, the Bengals, not only had a chance to wrap up the AFC North, but they would suffer some pretty bad losses within the division, especially on Halloween night. I still remember when the Bengals were falling down 25-0 to the skid marks. And they actually, their playoff game against the Baltimore Ravens, well, it could have been decided by a coin flip, like in terms of who was going to host it. Now, had they lost that Week 18 game against the Ravens, yeah, that would their home the host of that game, the wild card game, which was against the Ravens, could have been in Baltimore. Had they lost via coin flip, had they lost that coin flip, the Bengals Ravens game would have been in Baltimore, even though the Bengals won the division. So fortunately for Cincinnati, they didn't have to worry about that. They won the game in Week 18 and met them next week in Cincinnati. But that game, that wildcard game, surprisingly, the Ravens stayed in it because of their defense. But the Bengals were blessed with the gift from the gods. And Tyler Huntley's goal line gaffe, his fumble, led to a long fumble recovery for a touchdown by Sam Hubbard, and that ended up being the decider for Cincinnati eliminating the Ravens in the first round matchup. Then the Bengals had to go to snowy Buffalo in the divisional game in a proper matchup with the Bills, and they easily dismantled them. But in fairness to that game, it was, like I said, with the Bills, it was pretty obvious that the Bills were just emotionally checked out. Now, the Bengals were one step away from reaching that goal of getting back to the Super Bowl in a rematch with the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC title game. And, you know, the Bengals played pretty well in that game against the Chiefs, but they couldn't repeat the same success from last year against Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. Joe Burrow just threw one too many critical interceptions. The offensive line, just like last year, was not that great. And especially even with the new look offensive line, they were less than 100%. They dealt with injuries late in the season. They badly missed Lyle Collins because late in the season he tore his ACL. And there were not that many good calls in that game. But even then, late in the game, they didn't do that great. So overall, you know, surely it wasn't a great end to their season for Cincinnati. But despite losing in the AFC title game, hey, these Cincinnati Bengals overcame the Super Bowl losers curse and proven that they are a title contender for years to come. And they definitely have their franchise quarterback. Sure, they'll still have to deal with Patrick Mahomes for years to come, but they've already proven they can slay the dragon. And while they couldn't do it again this year, their time will come when they have to meet again. So looking at their offseason so far, they signed another offensive tackle in Orlando Brown Jr. from the Kansas City Chiefs, but in turn, they released Lyle Collins. So when one tackle comes in, one has to go out. So I guess the deciding factor was Lyle Collins tearing his ACL and I guess stealing away Orlando Brown Jr. So, hey, you get some, you lose some. They also signed tackle Cody Ford from the Arizona Cardinals, so continuing to beef up Joe Burrow's protection, which is good. But they did lose safety Jesse Bates to the Falcons and Von Bell, so they lost both their safeties to the NFC South. But they did re-sign linebacker Jermaine Pratt. So for Cincinnati, the most important thing, I guess, so far for this offseason was continuing to beef up Joe Burrow's protection. So good for them. Now, some of the things that they should do for the rest of this offseason, maybe find some depth for the interior defensive line, because it's definitely good to have Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson in the pass rush, but they could still use some help in the interior with Joseph Asai and DJ Reader. Especially like in the case of last year, they dealt with some injury, like multi-week injuries in the season. So I'm just saying that they could use some help getting some interior pressure. And maybe they can upgrade at corner too. So the Bengals secondary was okay, but when it came to passing situations, when either teams fell apart or falling behind or trying to make a comeback or big plays happened, then the Bengals were just kind of sleeping on the wheel. They haven't re-signed Eli Apple, but I can always find an upgrade for him anyway. And so perhaps the draft is a good opportunity for Cincinnati to address these team needs. So overall, the Bengals avoided the dreaded Super Bowl losers curse. In other words, when a team that goes to the Super Bowl loses, they do bad the next year. They avoided that in 2022. They established themselves as a long-term AFC contender instead. We know Joe Burrow now is a top 3 quarterback in the league, along with Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Of course, Patrick Mahomes is the top dog. But as long as the Bengals can continue to help Joe Burrow out in every way they possibly can imagine, then I think Cincinnati has a really good shot at making it back to the AFC title game and perhaps making another shot at the Super Bowl next year.